I think it's more often the intangibles that prevent consultants from being able to grow their consulting business than the tangibles. What I mean by tangibles is, expertise, skill set, capabilities, marketing, etc. Right? Those are tangible things. But I don't find those to be the real limiters a lot of time. I think it's some of the more intangible, subtle beliefs that they might not even be aware of that are actually limiting their growth. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean 100% because we have this conversation so often, right? And there also seems to be often a disconnect between the idea of growing and then making the decision and the reality of growing. I think most of the folks who want to grow, they like the idea, this sort of nebulous idea of what growth is, right? Something's bigger, something's better, something's more exciting. But when it actually comes down to doing the things that they need to do to grow, then we completely bang into, to your point, the limiting beliefs that hold them back. And it's kind of fascinating because, yeah, what's holding them back isn't anything external to themselves in a lot of cases. It's very much the way they, approach and think about their business and themselves.
Well, I think that characterization of they like the idea of growth is very accurate, right? I like the idea of 15% body fat, which might not sound amazing, but for me, that would be amazing. That'd be very, very good. I like the idea of it. Am I committed to doing it and engineering my lifestyle around it? Probably not today, maybe eventually at some point. I think that's true for a lot of consultants is, yeah, they like the idea of growth. They like the idea of doing $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million. They like the idea of it, but are they committed to the path and what that path requires? Not so sure.
Well, and I would suggest that even before committing to the path, what they're unable to do, and if you think about 15% body fat, maybe this also rings true to you, right? Is are you able to truly think of yourself as a guy with 15% body fat? Like that to me is the thing that's missing, right? You sort of see growth or 15% body fat as something that's doable maybe by other people, right? It happens outside of me, but I'm not the person who can do that. So I think there's a fundamental misalignment there when you don't believe, like truly believe internally that you are the kind of person who can grow your business to multi-millions or to get to 50%
Am I
body
really the
fat.
guy that walks around without his shirt off in the sidewalk in the middle of the day? Is that who I have to be now?
Exactly.
Can't be that guy. Right?
You have to grunt every time you pick up a weight.
So let's get into some of those subtle, intangible beliefs that maybe somebody who, wants to grow and says, look, I want to grow my consulting business. I want a bigger business. I'm not satisfied with the status quo. I want to keep going. Let's get into some of those subtle beliefs that we've seen pretty often hold people back. Where do you want to start?
I think let's start with the most obvious one, the one that kind of comes up first. And it's interesting because I think this pops up most often, but I'm also still not sure it's like at the base of what people are concerned about. But let's talk it through. And that is the notion of, I'm the only one that can do this. It has to be me, right? Yeah. I'm the only one who can do it right. I'm the only one who can do it well enough. I'm the reason clients come here. This idea that I, with my limited capacity, am the only resource that can do the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah. It's like the dry cleaner not hiring staff because they're the only one that knows how to do dry cleaning.
Oh, yeah, fair.
Like we can look at that, or you're the pizza shop not hiring staff because you're the only one that can make the pizzas.
Yeah.
Like we can look at those examples and agree that's bizarre, right? That's absurd because making pizzas is teachable and dry cleaning is teachable. And I'm not arguing that your consulting is as simple as that. But if you're going to argue that it's fundamentally unteachable or that nobody else can possibly do what you do with some training, I don't know. Is that arrogance? What is that?
Well, it's fear and it's arrogance. It's a little bit of both. But I think there's also not recognizing what your own limitations are. And not recognizing there are probably some components of your business that someone else is going to do, better and faster, more effectively than you are. So I think, a lot of it is less about sort of a well thought out feeling or, a well thought out opinion, and more just about, well, this is where we are and I am who I am. And therefore, there's nothing beyond me in this current scenario.
Well, I like what you said there. It's fear and or it's arrogance. Yeah, it could be arrogance, but you're right. It could just be a self-imposed belief that's protecting you from growing. Because you say you want to grow, but fundamentally there's some discomfort there. You're not quite sure if you really want to do what's required to grow. So you have this self-imposed limiting belief around, well, I can't train someone to do what I do. That's not possible. What does that belief do? It maintains safety. Because it's not possible, I cannot be faulted for not pursuing the growth that I say that I want for the reasons that I want it. But I'm irreplaceable. I can't train somebody, so I'm off the hook. And I think, to your point, it's probably that fear I don't think anyone's that arrogant ultimately, but I think it's that fear that creeps up and prevents people from going down the path. This is 100% rings true to my experience. Carrie will recall, because she was around back then, that I was doing all the things at one point in my business. And actually, Carrie, initially, we brought you on to help us expand our capacity to serve more clients, right? And to build a real coaching infrastructure that wasn't just reliant on me. And what was my objection, Carrie?
You had to do it. No one else could.
Yeah, I kind of, a little bit, not grudgingly, but skeptically, I would say, went down the path with you. I mean, I initiated it, right? So I knew we had to do it, but I was skeptical, right? And I kind of thought, well, if other consultants or coaches are going to come in and do what I do, there will be a dip in quality. And maybe that dip in quality can be mitigated, can be managed. And that's what you came in to ultimately deliver on at that stage. But I expected a dip. I expected, to me, it was a compromise on the client experience. And what I actually got was, I often say that what's bad for my ego is usually good for business. Right. So this is bad for my ego, but good for business. What I actually found is that when we brought in other consultants, coaches, experts to not replace me, but to do the pieces of the puzzle and to advise on the pieces of the puzzle that I wasn't necessarily the world's foremost expert on, the client experience got better. Clients got better results. They were more satisfied than when it was just me. And I was then able to scale the business as a result of that. But it required an active challenging of this belief that I was, a unicorn and nobody can do what I do and you can't possibly replace me. And I think the challenge is a lot of that. I don't know if you want to call it hubris, you can call it hubris, but a lot of that was helpful in the earlier stages of the business in terms of having confidence. But at a certain point, kind of becomes the limiting factor in my experience.
Yeah, and I also think there's a certain, beyond the hubris, there's also potentially a certain vulnerability, right? Because if you are the person who is, holding everything together and solving every problem, and, you can see some of the cracks that might exist, right? The areas where you create challenges for yourself, where things are more difficult, that you can solve and resolve them. I think it's also tough to let other people into that, right? To let other people see how it is that you're doing things. It's difficult to, admit is a strong word, but, to put out there for everyone to be able to view where those areas are that you're maybe not as confident or don't have things nailed down as much. Or, the other challenge is where you're figuring things out on the fly, right? The notion that if everything was codified and you could hand over an instruction manual to someone, that probably feels a lot more comfortable. But that's not the case for most of us, right? Most of us you've got part of that kind of stuff figured out. And then there's the part where you are flying by the seat of your pants. And I think it's also difficult to assume that someone else could do that, but difficult just to show people that that's what's happening, right? You need to kind of let go of the facade that everything is under control.
So you're tapping into another fear altogether, which I think is very prevalent. And that is, if I train people to do what I do, what's stopping them from going out on their own and doing it themselves and becoming my competitors? If I open up the kimono and show them how it's done, why would they continue to work for me? Why don't they just go somewhere else?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, we're talking about growth in terms of adding people, adding resource at this point. I think we should probably talk about the other kind of growth and the other challenges and the other roadblocks that people put in their way as well. But when we talk about bringing on people, there's this fear that I finally figured out my special sauce, right? I know what it is. I've got it nailed down, and now I'm going to share it with somebody else. And they're going to take it and run. What's fascinating about that is you rarely see it, right? That, I think, is diminishing the understanding of how unique each one of us is.
Yeah.
Even if they go out to do something similar, it's not the same, right? The reason you're able to build your niche in the first place is largely because of you.
I think it's also misplaced confidence, right? I think a lot of folks would like to believe that it's the delivery of the service is really where they're separated from the pack, right? Mm-hmm. That no one delivers like me, and if I let people in to see the secret sauce of my delivery, they can just replicate it successfully on their own. And that is, to your point, I think it's diminishing of all the other things that are required to have to build a consulting business that's successful. It's not just the very specific delivery of your service. There's the marketing, there's the sales, there's the business development, there's the positioning, there's the strategy, there's all this stuff that happens behind the scenes that a client might not see. And you could hire somebody and parachute them in to do the delivery component. And frankly, if they're naive enough to think that they can replicate the entire business model because they know how to do that one piece of the puzzle, let them, because the reality is there's far more going on that makes the business work than just that one delivery mechanism. And I think, what would serve consultants well is to stop thinking about their service offering as the thing that cannot be replicated, because actually it can. It absolutely can.
Yep.
But think about your business at large as something that cannot be replicated. The combination of your target market, your business model, your results mechanism, your offer, the delivery, your reputation, all of these things combined make it hard to replicate you.
Well, and also, what's truly behind that is a real scarcity mindset, right? So the first assumption is, well, of course, as soon as they come in and see what I'm doing, they're going to want to do it, which, maybe they do, maybe they don't, right? But I think, the second thing is sort of believing that, well, if somebody else, if I help to spawn a competitor, that's going to create a problem for me because there's not enough to go around, because I'm not special enough, because. And so I think it also, really speaks to what's at the basis of a lot of our challenges mentally, often as humans, right? Which is the mindset of scarcity.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think there's a closely related belief here to the first one that we started with, which is that, if I bring people on and I grow, the challenge is, clients love me. Clients want to deal with me. Clients want me. They're going to call me. They're going to email me. Like, they don't want to deal with somebody else. And so I can't grow because, it's funny how people frame this to themselves. Mm-hmm. I can't grow because I'm so good at what I do that clients couldn't bear the thought of dealing with somebody else.
Yeah.
How's that different?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is that the consultant will also make it so as well, right? That you can very easily prove that to yourself.
Yeah.
By never removing yourself, by always staying in the middle, by, ensuring that you're irreplaceable. And that, to your earlier point, is good for your ego, bad for your business. But I think, if you are smart about who you're bringing on board, if you're bringing them on board, as we're talking about, right, for the right reasons to do the right things, the things that they can potentially do, as well as, or, God forbid, better than you can, then you're going to find very quickly that, clients aren't as connected to the you of you than you think they are. They're connected to the outcome. They want that feeling of trust, right? They want that feeling that someone's on their side. But it doesn't necessarily matter whose name that is. And often they'll feel even more confident, right? Knowing that there's now either a team or there's someone who is, wholly dedicated to their success. I think it's challenge. You can create a challenge by underestimating the value of that.
Yeah. And I think this person has some deeper issues, right? Like even if they don't grow, and we've seen this behavior play out, more times than we can count. There's a type of consultant that needs constant validation of their usefulness, right? So they want more meetings with the client. They want more FaceTime. They respond to the email, right? Like drop everything and reply to the client. Like they want to be responsive. They want to be credited for their responsiveness. They want to feel useful.
Yeah.
And that creates a really tough business, because that means you probably over deliver. You're probably way too responsive to client needs from a timeliness perspective. You probably prioritize client work over everything else, including business development or marketing. And yeah, you're going to have a hard time replacing yourself, because all of a sudden, if you've got staff and a team of people that are doing the work, you will start to question your value and your usefulness. And I would say I probably went through that like a little more subtly than others might. That's a real thing. Like when you're not necessarily required to run the day to day, you do some more than others go through, I think, this kind of existential crisis, right? Which is like, well, what's my role here now? Right? Like, what do I really do here? And again, I think if you're the kind of person that really thrives on validation that comes from clients, this is going to be hard for you.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Well, I think, if we step away from the notion of growth, meaning that you need to bring other people on board, because I think even before you get to that point, you can really bump up against some head trash, right? You can really bump up against the challenges that stop you from growing the business, even to the limits of your own capacity. And, I think a lot of that comes from the way that a lot of consultants get into business, right? Because they usually leave a job and start a consultancy. And they usually leave a job, they start a consultancy, and the promise that they have to make to themselves or their partner or, the people around them, so that they don't feel like they're crazy doing this, is that they will replace their income. I'll make as much as I did. It'll be fine. And so what that starts to do is construct or create a construct where working a full-time, number of hours in a week and making the same amount of money that you used to bring home is the framework that you're working within. And until you can get to a place where you can prove or disprove that, right, where you can figure out exactly how much you need to work and how much money actually exists for for a consultancy like yours, you can really hold yourself back, because you've created these limitations that you don't even believe exist, right? You don't even think about, you don't even notice, because it seems like such an accomplishment, and it is in a lot of ways, right, to replace your income and to become self-employed and to become an entrepreneur in that way. That seems like enough. And so for some people, it's simply that they can't think beyond that. And therefore, all of the decisions they make lead them back to that very same setup, that very same structure of replacing their job.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you leave your job and you're making $200K, and understandably your priority is, let me get back to $200K, and then you get there, and then there's this kind of existential crisis where it's like, well, I guess this is it, right? I guess and this is really common, where you have some clients that get you to $200K, and then you take your foot off the gas completely.
Mm-hmm.
And you throw yourself into client work and serving those clients as if, and you would never verbalize this most likely, but there's a subtle belief in the back of your mind that they will never leave, right? You feel as secure in those clients as you did in your job, which likely didn't last forever anyways, right? And so there's this notion of, okay, I'm at $200K. I'm like, that's just going to keep going forever and ever and ever. And then what we find is that people shake themselves out of that funk when they lose a client or two, and they realize, okay, that's not permanent. And maybe staying at that, previous income watermark is was comforting in the beginning, but kind of irrelevant now because I'm playing a new game. There's a new field to play here.
Yeah, and I think that's important because that's where I actually thought you were going. To me, the belief that exists that's problematic there is it can't be big. It isn't bigger than this, right? It doesn't get bigger than this. This is kind of the, the limit. And so, I think it's really interesting when people then start to look around and notice that those limitations don't necessarily need to exist, or certainly don't exist in the way that they have really bought in to thinking that they do.
Yeah. Yeah, let's just dig into that a little bit more. Where does that come from? I believe, let's use the number $200,000. I believe I'm worth $200,000 a year because that's what I can command in the job market.
Yeah, some random person told me that's what I was worth.
Right? But now you're not applying for a job. You're not working at an organization full time and committing 40 hours a week to serving them in a job capacity that maybe you're right would typically command $200,000. Now you're playing a completely different game. And the question is not, what am I worth at 40 hours a week in a job to a company? The question is, what are the problems that I solve worth paying for the organizations that I serve? And the answer to that could very easily be $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year at your current capacity. It's got little to do with what you might have been worth in the job market. It's a completely different game that you're playing. Hopefully that's reasonably clear for folks. Now, what comes up a little bit sooner, I find, is, and you'll love this notion that, well, before I go and start doing marketing or business development or trying to grow, I need to make sure I have my ducks in a row. I need to make sure that I'm ready for all these clients that are coming my way. I need to make sure that I have all my fulfillment. And we have seen people, we got some crazy stories, right? Like we've seen people set up automations and their tech stack and like really flesh out their entire delivery model and almost like simulate a client experience before actually signing a new client just to make sure that they're ready for new clients to come. What's the problem there?
Well, I mean, there are so many problems where to start, but I think, the reality is that you truly don't know what you need until you learn what you need. And so all of these, to your point, like all these processes we set up, all of the structures that we put in place, because we've seen a business somewhere that seems to have that, right? Or the company that I left had that. What we often find out is that then you're redoing them, right? You're redoing them a year later because they weren't what your clients actually needed in the first place. And so I think, it's a good place to sit if you just want to feel safe, right? I feel super comfortable, researching which CRM it is that I want to use, although I have only 3 clients to put in it or, 3 prospects to put in it. It can keep you in a place of comfort. But what it's not going to do is tell you what's really required to deliver what it is you need to deliver. So, it's a cart before the horse situation where you are, investing so much time and effort and energy into serving clients that are not going to exist unless you do something differently.
Yeah, and it's a misallocation of resources. Like you want to dedicate your resources to addressing the riskiest parts of your proposition. Right. And the riskiest part in growth is not, can you assemble a delivery process? If you know what you're doing, you've done it before, like I'm very confident that if you have a paying client, and here's a question, if you had a new paying client that signed the paperwork today to start next week, could you assemble an engagement process to serve them? And the answer, I'm sure, is yes. And if it's not, there's a deeper problem here. Right? That's not the hard part. The hard part is acquiring the client. So you go off and do all this work to prepare for the client, that this fictitious client, when the real work is actually going out and acquiring the client, and the rest of it is fairly straightforward.
Yeah. Have we covered all of the myths that hold us back?
I think there's one more around this idea of, I find that one that we just covered is typical of, earlier stage folks that aren't even at capacity themselves. And they prioritize a bunch of, prep work, if you will, to even do the business development work to get to capacity. And then they get to capacity. Well, sometimes not those people, right? But many get to capacity. and they hit this ceiling. And there's this notion of, well, there's no sense in investing further in marketing or business development. This is a pretty common problem among our clients who come through 90-day pipeline. And we, what's our promise is we trade your opportunity problem with a capacity problem, right? We take away your opportunity problem and we give you a capacity problem. It's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless. And then folks take their foot off the gas in terms of marketing and business development because, well, what's the point? Because I need more capacity to take on more clients. What's the flaw in that thinking?
Well, I mean, the first flaw is you're not going to test whether you need capacity or not unless you're actually bringing the clients in, right? Like, we firmly believe that you need to bring the clients in. That needs to be the first order of business. And then you can, certainly backfill and figure out what your capacity looks like. And most people are underestimating the amount of capacity they have or the amount of capacity they could easily put in place. So I think, that's the first big flaw in that kind of thinking. I think it goes back to this notion of the same way as we talked about people like putting in place their entire structure of their business and their fulfillment. There's something about consultants where they want to have perfected everything, right? I want to perfect it before I move. I want to perfect it before I go. I want to perfect it before I grow. And the reality is that the world is not going to, deliver you the clients at the exact time that you want them and you feel ready. It's just not how it's going to work. Yeah. And so there's sort of a fundamental, belief that unless everything is in place, we go back to all the ducks are in a row, that everything's going to fall apart. And to me, the thing to be most confident about is not that you have everything in place, not that you have everything built, but that you can solve a problem. And if you are going into consulting, you do it because you solve problems, right? And so I think there's something fundamental to all of this about recognizing that you're someone who can solve a problem, not that you're someone who has all the problems pre-solved.
So there's a really interesting phenomenon, and I find this fascinating. This idea of I need more capacity, build more capacity in order to grow revenue. To your point about consultants, wanting everything to be perfect and really buttoned up. I think if you ask the average consultant, would you rather have, let's say you have $500,000 worth of capacity. Okay. So you can deliver on $500,000 worth of work in a year. Let's just make that assumption. Okay. I think if you ask most consultants, would you rather have $500,000 of demand to serve your $500,000 of capacity? So it's perfect, right? Demand meets supply perfectly, 1-to-1. You have just as much demand as you have the capacity to deliver on. So you make $500,000. That's scenario one. Scenario two is, would you rather have $1 million worth of demand, but still only $500,000 worth of capacity? So you still only make $500,000, but you have twice as much demand for your services. And I think there's a lot of consultants that prefer scenario one because it's neat and it's clean and it's tidy and it's 1-to-1, and they don't feel like they're wasting opportunity. But obviously, I'm going to argue for scenario number two. Why? Because you call that wasted opportunity. I call that excess demand. Right? And in economics, when demand exceeds supply, price goes up. But not only that, you as a consultant now, you can afford to invest in growth, because if demand perfectly exceeds investing capacity, rather, because demand perfectly equals supply, then yeah, I get it. Like, I don't have enough clients to bring on more people to expand capacity. But if demand doubles supply, you now have a really strong argument for adding capacity and taking advantage of that demand. But you're only going to get there by keeping your foot on the gas.